move on to lautering then.
Cool.
Nice.
Well, then, so you'll see. So at the end of the process of mashing, you'll get some kind of a mixture between grain and sweet water, some kind of syrupy water, and that means you've extracted the sugar. And what you want next is to separate the solid parts of the grain, and you want that on one side, and on the other side you want the rest of the sugary liquid that will go to boil and then fermentation. So you need a way of just do that separation or that filtration, if you want, in a way. Another way of saying is filtration. The brewing term is lautering. So there are different ways of doing. What you see right now on the screen, it's called a false bottom. It's basically some kind of a sieve that sits next to the bottom of your kettle, and basically the idea is to transfer all of your mash onto that sieve and leave it there for, I don't know, 10-15 minutes, and the idea is that all of the solid parts of the grain will sediment and drop in on that false bottom. So it's and all of the liquid will be on top of it. So you really want to make that separation as a first step, and then you will allow all of the liquid to go through the rest of the grain, and the rest of the grain will actually act as a filter itself. So you should get clear wort out of that below that false bottom that is flowing below that false bottom. Another way of doing another picture is also you can do it brew in a bag system. As it is actually, you do your first step in a bag, and then you remove the bag with the rest of the grain in it, and then you'll see you'll keep the water in your kettle, and you will have all the grain out. It's a quick and easy way of doing. It's definitely not the most efficient way of doing, but it will do the job.
It's also the cheaper as well. It's cheaper than having a separate kettle.
Yeah, because otherwise you probably need to transfer to a different, especially if you go multiple step, then you need to transfer to another kettle that has that false bottom, because it's hard to do multiple step infusion on that false bottom. So you probably need to transfer it to another kettle.
Yeah, just to add, for example, when you are doing the lauter, if the liquor is not the wort is not clear enough, you can also, with a jar, like make a kind of recirculation through it, or with a pump or whatever, just until it makes it very clear, until it's on point for you, before you start to transfer it to your boil kettle.
Yeah, just read a bit about it, see what are the different ways of doing. The false bottom one is the most common, I think. And indeed, as David said, yeah, do not hesitate. What we call it recirculating. So you take from the bottom and you put it back on top, because there will still be a little bit of small particles in the beginning. Just do that for 10 minutes and just put everything back on top for 10 minutes, and you'll see that your wort will clear out. At some point, you'll have really clear wort, and that wort that's what you want to keep. And so that wort can go in another kettle, and that's what you will boil. And boiling is the next step, basically. Lauter can take quite a lot of time. It really depends, and I think we mentioned it already. This is where your grist has the most impact. So if you have a shitty grist, expect a shitty lauter.
Or if you have speculoos in your mash.
I was looking at you, David, because I know you spent quite a lot of hours waiting for the lauter to end up already. Yeah. So what was your longest lauter, David?
I mean, it was when we were testing the speculoos stout for the collaboration we did with Maison d'Antoine. So the first test was a big mess. So we basically put 30 kilos of crushed speculoos cookies together with the malt, and it's so fat and creates so much kind of gelatin in the mash that it makes it impossible to lauter. So it was something like 7 hours lautering.
Yeah. So yeah, yeah, 7's pretty bad.
Pretty bad.
But I think it's a step that should take up to 2 hours.
Depends of the beer, of course. I mean, if it's a big beer, you can expect like something like 3 hours. If it's a beer like Delta, you can expect it 1 hour and a half, 2 hours. If it's 20 liters, like what you're talking here, I mean, it should be way faster than what we are seeing.
Yep. I think I've got two tips there. If you're using a false bottom, just make sure you pre-fill your kettle with water up to the false bottom layer. If you don't, there's a risk that you have a bubble of air like sticking right there, and it's not gonna work. That was I had another one that I forgot already, but I think that's that's the critical one. It's a very easy mistake.
That's a very good one. That's very good.
Yeah. Questions? I don't know.
Yes, one that's not exactly about Lauter, but again from Samuel Lange, very invested. Thanks, Samuel.
Thanks, Samuel.
Cheers, man.
He's asking if we are to use tap water, would you recommend us to treat it beforehand, like with chlorine or lime scale?
So it again, what we said, step water.
If you wish to use tap water, would you recommend him to treat it beforehand or not, with chlorine or lime scale or something like this?
I mean, again,
it depends where you live. I think if you drink your tap water on an everyday basis, you don't need to treat it. I mean, it is safe per se. It might just be too much. There might be too much chlorine in it. Chlorine, I don't know how to say. But you can usually smell it. You know that swimming pool smell, kind of. You might want to boil it first to just get rid of it, and then let it cool down again.
Or you can also just buy bottled water. Normally they are pretty neutral, and you can use it to it.
You know, that's true. Actually, if you want to control your water profile, just buy big bottles of water, and you'll have.
And normally they came with the mineral composition, which then it makes it easier to adapt according to what you want.
So if you want more calcium or more magnesium or more of this, more of that, less of that, then yeah, buy in a bottle. I would. I mean, it's you create a bit more waste, but if you really want to do it, that's probably the best way of doing it.
Yep. All right, great. Next question from Rick Bob. He's asking if is it normal to have small holes in the brew in the bag method after the first use?
No.
I've never done it actually. I don't think so.
No.
I think your bag should be good for 10, 15 runs at least.
Yeah, normally they are pretty resistant. I think first use and you have already holes on it. I mean, besides the normal holes that they already have.
Maybe it's because it's too close from the heating elements and it burns. I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
All right. Well, I think we're ready to move on to sparging, right?
Nice. Let's go.
Yeah. So we've separated the sugar and the liquid from the rest of the grain. So there's one thing you can do is to sparge or rinse your spent grain with just hot water, and I will just rinse the sugar out of the grain because there's still quite a lot of sugar left into the grain, so yeah, you just collect more sugar and you rinse out your spent grain. So there are different ways of doing. The picture you've got there is a great example of DIY. It's better to kind of, I don't know, shower it. So you don't want to, like in general, you want to be super careful with your grain bed. The grain bed is the amount of grain that sits on your false bottom. You don't want to shake it too much, otherwise you'll have a lot of particles going loose and coming into your wort. So just be super careful, and one way of being careful is to actually sparge it. You can use a shower, I don't know how you call it, but shower taps. I don't know what's the English word for it, or do that kind of thing that you see on your screen. Just be super gentle with it.
Yeah.
What we do in the brewery is we go by wave. So we had a given amount of water, you let it run through and again. So we go different waves of rinsing. I think in the recipe here, David, this is where it was a bit maybe confusing at some point.
No, here was fine. I mean, in the Sparge, we just said add 14 liters, which is fine. You can do it all at once if you want. I would recommend to split it in 2 or 3 stages. So you add, I don't know, 6 liters at the first. You water those 6 liters, then after you add 4 liters, and then again 4 liters. You can do it in 3 stages, just to make sure you are gentle with your grain bed. Don't put too much water at once as first.
Yeah, and then you'll see your runoff will clear out and will get more and more watery, and that's actually normal because you're actually putting water on top of your grain, right?
So you are taking out the rest of the sugars you have in the grain, so it's normal that you will have less and less sugars in your grain bed. And then leads to the boil, right? There's questions about Sparge?
Well, there's one question about it's not actually about sparging. It's more of there's a mention of sparging in it, but it's a long question. So hold on. From Bruno Clément, who's I'm gonna retranscribe it. He says, "Hi there, I'm an amateur brewer with no background. Could you elaborate how I calculate the volumes within my brewing system? I have a brew monk with 8-liter dead space. I feel like I use 40 liters for 4 kilos of malt, and it won't be enough to cover it all. Usually for my preferred Citra recipe mash, I mash with 18 liters for 5 kilos of pale ale for a good mash consistency. Do you recommend I change the volumes for the Delta with a brew monk? And if so, do I also change the volume of Sparge? Thank you."
It feels like the ratio between malt and water was about okay. He said 5 kilos, 18 liters. That's a bit low, maybe. No,
that sounds fine.
No, that sounds just fine. The question was really long, to be honest. How do you calculate all of this? I think the principle is that you need to have the right amount of water per kilo of grain that you put in the mash. That's the first thing. So that when you transfer it, when you start your loutering, everything is happening okay. How much you should sparge on top of it is actually, it kind of depends on your process though, and how much sugar you can extract. So it's hard to tell just like this. In this case, we say stop when you get 24 liters. When you get to 24 liters, when you bring together your wort and your sparge together, it should end up with 24 liters.
But you mentioned the equipment, right? So I think it will also depend of the equipment. I'm not familiar with the brew monk system.
Exactly, yeah, no, me neither.
I'm just checking here online, but I don't know, it's similar to a Braumeister or something like that. I really I don't have the specs for it. So I don't know.
No, it's really tough to answer that one. Sorry.
But normally people share those infos about specific specs for equipments on online forums. So if you can check with people that have more experience using it, perhaps we'll be fine. Because without knowing the equipment, I'm not sure we can help you that much. But for example, the ratio greased to water sounds fine. It's like 3.45, which is perfectly fine. What he said about the Sparge, Xavi, sorry?
So he's asking if he has also to change the volume of sparging. In the meantime, there was another comment from somebody who replied to him, Christophe Cartier, saying, add the dead space amount to the mash, remove it from Sparge. He also has the brew monk.
Okay. I'll be
so
back.
Just connect each other and talk with each other.
Yeah, I think the internet is a gold mine for home brewers nowadays. Everything is in there. So if you look for it, keep going without me. I'll be back in 2 minutes. Just keep going.
Your bladder.
Yeah, that sounds like a pee break.
I think he wants a second beer. I think he's gone with the first.
Okay.
All right. So ready